Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today we will study uh, the meanings of two verses of the Quran, inshallah, verses 7 and 8 of Surah Al Imran, the third chapter of the Quran. The Almighty says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ. He is the one, that is, it is God who has revealed upon you, O Prophet, O Messenger, Al-Kitab, this book. Minhu ayatum muhkamat. In it there are verses that are firm, clear in their meanings, unambiguous. Wa ukharu mutashabihat. And there are others that are metaphorical. That is, the Quran, the message of God, has two types of verses. One that are metaphorical, and the others that are not metaphorical, that are describing principles, injunctions, stories, literally. The Quran goes on to say, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ. So, as for those whose hearts are twisted, this is an expression used by the Quran to refer to people who are not interested in knowing the truth, who are not inclined to know what the right understanding is. And this, the Quran tells us, is because of the fact that their misdeeds, their wrong behavior, poor morals have caused their hearts to be rusted, to be twisted. So as for those whose hearts are tainted, twisted, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ, they go after the verses that are metaphorical. Why? مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِ. To create mischief and to look for their reality. Ibtigha ta'wili, to look for their real meanings, the reality behind them. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَعْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. The fact is that nobody knows about their reality except God. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And as for those who are firm in their knowledge, who have a strong inclination to learn sincerely and genuinely, يَقُولُونَ, they say, آمَنَّا بِهِ, we believe in it, كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا, all verses are from our Lord. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And nobody is going to understand, nobody is going to get benefit from the message of the Quran except those who use their intellect properly. Now, what exactly is being talked about? The Almighty is telling us that in the Quran, in order to help people get guided, God has mentioned in His book verses which are metaphorical and verses which are literal, whose meanings are clear, and the references to which the meanings are pointing at are absolutely unambiguous. Those muhkamat are the verses which are the real book, that is, the part of the book which we need to seek guidance from. However, in order for the Almighty to deliver His message effectively, forcefully, He has also chosen to give certain verses which are mutashabihat, which are allegorical, which are metaphorical. That is, which, although are clear in what they're saying, their meanings are clear, yet what they are referring to is not what we humans can know for certainty, for sure. Now, what are these verses that the Almighty is talking about? And what is the purpose of mentioning them if we cannot know their reality? And how do we know that this word ta'wil is referring to reality and not let's say interpretation, as some people understand that that's what the meanings of this word are? Well, first thing first, the Quran is a book which talks about many subjects. And one important subject that the Quran talks about is the description of the unseen world. It tells us that the world that we are living in, the visible world, the observable world, is not the only world that exists. It tells us that beyond this world, there is a world that is not visible to us right now. We cannot see it. It's the unseen world. And we have been asked to believe in the unseen world. يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Now, because the unseen world is not visible, and we have never had the opportunity of knowing it, of viewing it, therefore, we don't have any words for it in our language. You see, the language that we speak is a response to the inner urge, yearning that we have to express ourselves. I want to talk to you, you want to talk to me. And therefore, we need to have medium of language. There are objects around us, the books that you can see. I have a watch right next to me. I have a book. I have the Quran with me. And I'm using the appropriate words for all these objects that are right now with me. However, if there are certain objects, certain realities, which even though they are there, yet we have not seen them, how can we express them? How can we talk about them? Because there are no words in our language for that purpose, for expressing them. So the Almighty has therefore used metaphorical language for the purpose of describing them. It has used the human language where we have words not exactly expressing the same realities which are to be referred to be talked about, but somewhat closer to them, somewhat near them in description. They are metaphorical, they are allegorical, they are mutashabih. Somewhat similar, but not exactly the same. Why? Because it's a limitation of our language. It's a limitation of all humans who have not as yet been able to see the world which lies beyond this life, and therefore there are no appropriate expressions in our vocabulary to express them. It's not something very different from a scenario wherein if somebody was to explain to people the objects and the details of a world that they have not been able to see. For instance, something that was to happen in the future. If let's say 300 years from now, 300 years ago, somebody was to describe an aeroplane, obviously some way of expressing that understanding had to be adopted. Whatever way of expressing that reality would be adopted would be metaphorical, would be mutashabih. Maybe the person might say that there would come a time when there will be a big bird-like machine which will have wings, and people are going to sit inside that bird, and then it would fly like a bird flies. Well, all these things, if They are not as yet visible. They have not been experienced. You cannot do much about it except for the fact that you come up with the closest expressions to what the reality is. So the Almighty, while describing the heaven and the hell, the angels, God's throne, God breathing His breath into Adam, etc. All these are the realities that had to be described. But there weren't any words in human language, not just in Arabic, in any language. Why? Because, as I said, languages are actually a response to the needs that we have to express. And when we have not experienced or seen anything, why would we have the words for it? You just don't concoct words for nothing. You have something that needs to be put across, and for that purpose, you have words for it. So the Almighty says that these mutashabihat, these are the ones which people who have their hearts twisted, rusted, tainted, they go after these verses. Why? Because they're not interested. You see, if you are interested in understanding a message, you will follow the message, you will understand it the way its author wants you to understand, the way its presenter wants you to see, to look at it. But if you're not interested, if you are not interested in the message, the way it is to be, it has been presented, then obviously you will find ways and means to ignore it, to say things which are irrelevant, which would cause the message to not be presented properly. There would be noise, there would be disturbance, there would be distractions. That's what the purpose of a person who is not interested in a message, his purpose is. So the Almighty says that those people whose hearts are twisted, tainted, they go after these verses so that they cause mischief. They cause the message to not be presented properly. وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِ. And in order for them to look for their real meanings, the reality of them. This word ta'wil has been used in the Quran in another passage, which gives us a reason to have a good insight into its meanings. In Surah Yusuf, Surah number 12, chapter 12, in the very early part of the surah, we know that the Almighty tells us that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he saw a dream wherein there were 11 stars and the moon and the sun prostrating, bowing down before him. Now, all these words are very familiar. Stars, sun, moon, bowing down, all this is what we know because they are a part of our language. But what did that dream actually mean? So when many years later, at the climax of the story, Yusuf's brothers and his parents, they inclined, bowed down towards him. Yusuf alayhi salam, he said to his father, Haza ta'wilu royai. This is the ta'wil of my dream. That is, this is the reality of my dream. The 11 stars were my brothers. The sun and the moon were my parents. Likewise, what exactly is meant by the streams and rivers flowing in the paradise, the long shadows, the mention of fruits, the mention of drinks, the mention of milk, the river of milk, of different items that have been described likewise in the hell. What do they really mean? We don't know. For instance, the the Quran mentions that there are going to be 19 angels in the hell. Now, why 19? Why not some other number? What exactly is going to be the nature of those 19 angels? We don't know. All that we know is the mention in the Quran about them, full stop. And if somebody who's interested in understanding the Quran properly would do well to say to himself or herself that, look here, this is a mention which to me is metaphorical, and therefore I have no business to try to go deeper into what it says, because this is a trial. The Almighty mentioned these metaphorical verses, mutashabihat, in order to describe certain realities that are there in the unseen, invisible world, so that we have a somewhat better understanding. But He also wanted it to be a trial for all people who are trying to understand the Quran. Those who don't want to seriously understand the Word of God would make excuses to go around and not to understand the real message. Now, the words used in the Quran for the purpose of describing the paradise and the hell are the words that were more familiar to the immediate addressees of the Quran, that is, the Bedouins of the Arabian Peninsula some more than 1400 years ago. The kind of lifestyle that they thought was the ultimate lifestyle of luxury, the kind of dresses, istabrak, etc., mentioned in the Quran. They have been mentioned to describe the paradise. But the Almighty has warned and clarified that this is not real, it's just metaphorical. So it says, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَعْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Nobody knows about their reality except God. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And those who are firm in their knowledge, those who are interested and serious in knowing the truth. يَقُولُونَ, they say, آمَنَّا بِهِ, we believe in it. كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All this is from our Lord. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And nobody learns properly, genuinely, except those who are real, genuine seekers of truth. They use their intellect properly. This verse is towards the end. In actual fact, in the next verse, it is followed by a prayer which says, Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana. O our Lord, allow our hearts not to be twisted, tainted. Ba'da is hadaitana, after the fact that you have guided us. Wahab lana min ladunka rahma, and bestow upon us mercy from you. Innaka antal wahhab. Indeed, you are the one who gives abundantly. You give through your mercy in a measure which is beyond our possibility of knowing its depth, its vastness. This was the first part of our today's program. In the second part now, I am proceeding with the description of the various different topics of Islam and the Quran, the topics that we would do well to understand what the Almighty is saying. So, my today's topic is the coherence in the Quran, which I mentioned in my last presentation, if you recall. But within the description of the coherence of the Quran, Nazm Quran, I will today talk about the Surah Unity. I hope you would recall that in my last presentation I mentioned that there has been a remarkable discovery in the presentation of the Quran that we have been able to come up with, we have been able to learn from in the relatively recent times. That is, we know that the Quran now the way it has been given to us by God, has three different levels at which it is very intelligently, very wisely um, put together in a coherent manner. The first level of coherence is the level of surah unity. The second level is the level of surah pairs. And the third level is the level of surah groups. Today I'll briefly describe the understanding of surah unity. You see, if you read the Quran, and I'm sure that each one of you must have read the Quran several times with meanings, you are faced with a challenge. And the challenge is that while going through the verses of the Quran in a particular surah, I'm talking about the longer surahs, you get a feeling that it's not very coherent, that the subjects, the themes are suddenly changing. There are jumps, there are jerks, there are turns, there are twists, and they happen unannounced. For instance, you find that the Quran is mentioning the story of prophets, and all of a sudden starts talking about the life hereafter, and then starts talking about the fact that we should pray and give zakat, talks about the phenomenon of rainfall, etc. And the way it's happening, it really surprises you. And allow me to say, sometimes it disappoints you. Because on the book of God, you would expect that the book is actually going to present to you a message which you would know is flowing in a manner that one part of it is neatly connected with the other part. Now, what I want to tell you is that as a consequence of the process of deep reflection on the verses of the Quran and its surahs over and over again by some highly gifted scholars from the subcontinent in particular, what we now know is that what we expect from the Quran is exactly what the Quran delivers. That is, it's a flow of verses in the most coherent manner. The only thing that you see in the Quran not happening is that there are certain words or sentences which would bind one passage from the other. They are missing. Had those words or passages, binding words or passages, been there, you wouldn't have had any problems in understanding why one passage gives way to another. Now, the reason why it doesn't happen in the Quran is that the Quran is a book of very high literary merit, quality. And the Arab literature, its poetry, etc., they were expressed in the same style. And the Quran had come to dominate the world of literature as well. It had come to impress. It had come to make sure that those people who are being addressed are the ones who are so deeply influenced and impressed by the message of the Quran that they are inclined to accept and believe it to be God's word, and they should exclaim that this cannot be the message or the book of of created or written by, authored by a mortal human. Now, let me give you a few examples. The first example that I have chosen is the example in Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter, which by far is the longest chapter of the Quran. What we see is that in the first 39 verses of this chapter, there is a message which is a prelude to the subsequent part of the surah. The surah is divided into two parts. One that is addressing the children of Israel, and the other that is addressing Muslims. Now, immediately before the address to the children of Israel, from verse 40 onwards, we have a mention of the story of Adam and Iblis. The story which tells us that the Almighty created Adam, and he breathed his breath into him and required the angels to bow down before him. Everyone submitted to the Almighty's command except Iblis, the Satan. He was arrogant, and he knowingly knew that the Almighty has given him the command to bow down before Adam. He refused to submit. We know the story, it's a well-known story. But what puzzles, and as I said, what sometimes disappoints a reader is that immediately after this story is mentioned, you have a mention from verse 40 onwards, wherein the Almighty is inviting the children of Israel to have faith in the Quran and the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. Ya Bani Israel azkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum wa'ufu bi'ahdi ufi bi'ahdikum. O children of Israel, recall the blessings and mercies that we have bestowed upon you, and you fulfill my part of the promise, I will fulfill your part of the promise. وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ, and you fear me alone. And goes on to say, وَآمِنُوا بِمَا أَنزَلْتُ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا مَعَكُمْ, and believe in what we have revealed, which has come, fulfilling the prophecies that are with you. وَلَا تَكُونُوا أَوَّلَ كَافِرٍ بِهِ, and do not be the very first who would deny it. So, you wonder, why is it that these seemingly different, not relevant to each other passages coming next to each other? But when you go a little deeper into it, you would realize that these differences, this incoherence, or call it lack of compatibility of these two passages, is only apparent. In actual fact, what has happened is that the Almighty has, before inviting the Jews, the children of Israel, to have faith in the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, God's mercy be on him, he has mentioned the story of Adam and Iblis, reminding the Jews about the fact that Iblis was rejected by the Almighty, and he became a complete failure and was doomed forever because of the fact that he became arrogant. He thought that he is superior to Adam. He was created out of fire, whereas Adam was created from clay. And therefore, how come that a superior being should bow down before an inferior one? It was a similar problem with the Jews. They, being from amongst the children of Israel, they had this misunderstanding that they were superior to children of Ismail, because children of Israel had all along for 2,000 years had the privilege of receiving messages through messengers, through prophets. They were the progeny of prophets. They have been described in the Quran as well, people who have been chosen by the Almighty and given superiority over the entire mankind. So they thought that children of Ismail are ummiyin, unlettered. They're not educated. They don't know religion. And therefore they were expecting a prophet. But for some reason, they thought that the prophet would come from within the children of Israel. So it was primarily the arrogance of the Jews, like it was the arrogance of Satan, that caused them also not to accept the message of the Quran. So before inviting them to accept this message, the Almighty has mentioned the story of Adam and Iblis, so that the Jews would know that they are in a trial similar to the trial of Iblis, and they would do well not to repeat the same blunder as was committed by Iblis. So what I'm trying to say is that this passage of verses 40 onwards, preceded by verses 36, 37, 38, 39, that are talking about the story of Adam and Iblis, they are not there accidentally. They are there because the two put together would actually give the most effective effect on the reader's mind when he will start by reading the story of Adam and Iblis and then move on to the invitation that is extended to the children of Israel. That is one example. I'll just give you one or maybe two examples as much as the time would permit me. The next example is that of chapter 7, that is Surah Araf. In this chapter, what you find is that in verses 57 and 58, the Almighty is mentioning the phenomenon of rainfall, and it's mentioned very frequently, quite often in the Quran. The Almighty says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ. He is the one who sends winds as the one who bring good news before the advent, before the arrival of His mercy. Now God's mercy here means rainfall. Before the arrival of rainfall, if you were living in a hot climate like Pakistan, you would know that the cool wind, all of a sudden the appearance of cool wind is actually a prelude to, a precursor of rainfall. It's the rainfall whose good news is provided by this cool wind. The Almighty says, حَتَّى إِذَا أَقَلَّتْ سَحَابًا ثِقَالًا, until such time that it raises heavy clouds. سُقْنَاهُ لِبَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ, and we take them towards a land which is dead, parched, dry land. فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاءَ, then we cause rain to fall through these clouds. فَأَخْرَجْنَا بِهِ مِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ, then we bring out from the soil plants of all different kinds. كَذَلِكَ نُخْرِجُ الْمَوْتَى, likewise are we going to raise the dead. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, and we are mentioning it so that you may reflect and ponder. So the Quran refers to this fact quite often, that rainfall causing the dead soil to come back to life is actually a reminder of the fact that likewise we humans, after we'll be dead, will come back to life. So that's one mention, one aspect. Then the next verse goes on to say, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. As for the good land, the pious good land means, pure land means here fertile land. As for the fertile land, the good pure land, يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, crops come forth in it by the will of God, by the will of their Lord. وَالَّذِي خَبُثَ, And as for that land which is impure, that is, which is barren, la yakhruju illa nakida, nothing comes out except for useless bushes. Kazalika nusarriful ayat. Likewise do we mention our verses from different angles over and over again. Liqawmi yashkurun, for all those people who are willing to be grateful. Now obviously this question arises yet again as to why is it that this mention, which is quite clear, talking about the phenomenon of rainfall and the fact that the rain falls on different soils and the responses are different. Why are these two verses followed by a very long passage which is talking about different prophets coming to their respective nations and delivering God's messages to them and getting different responses from different people? There are people who believe, and there were people who rejected the message and did not believe. It starts from verse 59, which says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ, and we sent Nuh towards his nation. فَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ, and he said that, O people of my nation, worship God Allah. There is no other Lord, there is no other Creator worthy of being worshipped except Him. So, you start wondering what's going on. In the earlier verses, it was the phenomenon of rainfall that was being talked about. And now, there's a longish passage which has started talking about the different messengers going toward their respective nations and getting different responses. But again, if you are reading the Quran with deep reflection and reading it over and over again, you would realize sooner or later, or somebody would help you realize, that these two verses 57 and 58, when they are read before verse 59 onwards, they give you a very deep message. And the message is that, like in the case of rainfall coming from the sky, which comes from the sky, and it causes crops to sprout from the soil, but not necessarily the same way in all kinds of land. There are soils which are responsive, are fertile, and therefore rainfall helps them in bringing out crops, fruits, plants, rich in their quality. And there are soils which receive the same rainfall and nothing comes out of them. If at all anything, it's useless, plants, bushes. The idea is that, like it's true in the case of rainfall and soils and the responses of different soils, different responses of different soils, likewise is true with the case of humans when they are visited by messengers, when they receive God's message. And it all depends on the quality of soil inside a human being. That is, it all depends on how good a person is morally. If a person is morally good, genuinely good, is seeking truth, wants to know what the truth is not looking for excuses to go after his petty desires, is not over-influenced by his ego, to not accept what he thinks is below him, then if the person is good, then the divine revelation that also comes from the heavens, from the sky, from upwards, would cause such humans to become good believers. There are going to be responses in the form of crops of faith, of good deeds. But as for those people who have bad morals, whose inside personalities are badly affected by their poor moral performance in this world, uh, they would not be affected, influenced by the divine revelation, the message of God. So, the two passages coming together, uh, even though they seemingly are very different, they are actually linked together with a very deep, binding message, which, when we read carefully, we find that it is helping us in getting uh, deeper meanings from the verses of the Quran, which you would not have been able to get had these verses not come together. That was the second part of of today's program. Now I am available for your questions to be raised, and I'll try to make an attempt to answer them.
Jazakallah khair. So brothers and sisters, you can ask any questions related to the topic we discussed today, or might be you can ask of the topic. And Dr. Saab, in next session, we will continue from verse number 9 in Surah Al-Imran.
What I've been doing in the last few programs with you is that I'm picking a few passages from different surahs and started from Surah Al-Fatiha. We did a few passages of Surah Al-Baqarah. The next time, maybe another passage from Surah Al-Imran, or maybe I'll move on to Surah Nisa, if you allow me to do this way, because it's just an kind of an aerial view of some verses from each of the surahs. That's what I want to do.
I see, Jazakallah. Brother and sister,
welcome, Dr. Sir.
Walaikum assalam.
So my question is in reference to the first verse you recited, which was about Muhkamat and Mutashabihat.
Right.
So in that verse, there's a word used called Zaheer, as in there is some sort of crookedness, some sort of swerve, some sort of, something is kind of slightly wrong in their hearts.
Right.
So Allah uses that word to describe that these people are going to kind of dig into these mutashabihat and ultimately somehow misguide themselves. But people who are actually doing that, if you say to them that, look, this ayat is saying that you shouldn't look into these mutashabihat because, this is a sign of kind of crookedness, they won't admit that. In fact, everybody thinks that they are not the ones who have any kind of problem in their heart or any crookedness. So what does this Zaheer imply, and how do we understand this?
Brother, we need to be very careful when we mention the Quranic passage to people who are not familiar with it, because there is a difficulty. The difficulty is that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, at a time when the Almighty had made available circumstances that were very conducive and effective for the message to be delivered in its pristine form. The personality of the Prophet was such that there was no doubt about the fact that what he was presenting was being done in the most effective manner. Now the scenario is different. It's we mortals, people who have limited knowledge, not very upright in their moral performance, etc., who are making a humble attempt to deliver the message. And there is always this possibility of temptation that while reading the Quran, you put yourself in the position, the seat of the Prophet, and start saying to others that, look here, you are the ones who are being condemned. I think we should make an earnest attempt to help others understand what the Quran is saying. So what I'm saying is that if a person says that, I am not the one whose heart is twisted, I really want to understand. Don't ever think that his heart is indeed twisted, because we have no reason to doubt the intentions of others. We will try to help the person understand that, there are certain verses in the Quran which are talking about a world that we have not seen. And therefore, it is quite natural and logical that the words, the vocabulary used for such purposes, for this purpose, the words are not giving us the meanings, the literal exact meanings of what they normally are used for. Uh, Keep trying to help them understand. But obviously, do also mention that the Quran claims that there are people whose hearts are twisted and they therefore are unable to understand the Quran properly, because they would want to find ways to avoid understanding the true meanings of the Quran, and therefore instead of looking at the muhkamat, they are emphasizing on mutashabihat. Now there are two possibilities. When you will respond to the questions in a way that you don't appear to be accusing others of having something wrong in their personalities, there is a possibility that they will be more serious and open in understanding the Quranic message. And you never know that the person may actually get the point, because we honestly have no business in accusing anybody of having his her heart tainted, twisted, or rusted.
Exactly. We have still 10 minutes to left to conclude this session, or even we can conclude early if nobody has any other question.
I do have a question which is mentioned here. If there's nobody else asking a question, I can read it from here on my Facebook, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
It's not relevant to what we have discussed today, and that's something that you've already announced, that it's not necessary that you ask questions which are relevant directly to what we have discussed. There's somebody who's asking why the Almighty is not intervening in Syria, Iraq, where kids are killed, maimed, and they're hungry. You see, the Almighty has made this life a life of trial, and the next life is the life of rewards and punishment. If he starts intervening in the affairs of this life, then obviously the freedom that we humans have would be taken away. The Almighty knows that whatever suffering these people are going through, when they will come to Him, they will be adequately compensated for what they went through, and therefore He is in no hurry. However, He has His own ways of running the affairs of this world. He gave His message to us Muslims. We Muslims were made responsible to let the world at large know what the truth of God is. We were therefore expected to understand God's message and to practice it as best as we can. Now, if we are not discharging our obligations, if we are not doing what the Almighty expects from us, then the Almighty Himself has warned through the mention of the fate of the children of Israel that He is going to unleash His punishment on those who were expected to deliver His message, to be upright, to be fair, to be morally good. The children of Israel, when they were not up to the mark and they had gone absolutely in the opposite direction of what they were expected to do, the Quran mentions that twice in their history they were invaded by outside invaders who were military men, strong, and they ransacked the city of Jerusalem, and the Almighty did not come to their rescue. Why? Because whether it be the children of Israel or whether it be the children of Ismail, whose periphery we also belong to Muslims, if God's task is not getting delivered through them, then the Almighty is going to take them to task to teach them the lesson that, His message has to be taken seriously. Now, you might ask as to what is the problem, blame of those children, women, old people who probably didn't do anything deliberately wrong. As I said, in this life, people are taken ill, people go through miseries, etc. And it's something which you don't find is intervened by the Almighty to help them come out. You see many pious, noble people, they die of illnesses that are not curable, and at times you feel that they are going through miseries and hardships, which is very painful to even to see, to observe. This is a life of trial, and therefore there is no guarantee that people are going to be treated in this life in a fair and just manner. The next life is the real life. God keeps on reminding that life has to be acknowledged. Without understanding the next life, you simply cannot understand the logic, justification of this life as well. I've briefly answered the question. I hope it does.
Dr. Sir, there is a question asked by someone on this forum. He or she is asking, what is Asla Mansukh?
Okay. Nasikh or Mansukh. It's verses abrogated. There are verses in the Quran that some people claim were abrogated by certain other verses. You see, in the Quran, in some matters, the Almighty has adopted the policy of gradual evolution, gradual elimination of certain evils. Why? Because the Almighty wants us to know that He wants His message to be accepted by people willingly. When you force a list of injunctions, do's and don'ts down the throat of people, they might reluctantly take it because of your threatening ways, but they would not accept it willingly. So the Almighty, in His supreme wisdom, knew that people were habitual drinkers. They were so used to alcohol that it would not be possible for them to give it up if they were asked to do it immediately. So the policy that He followed was that He first informed them that it's not good, it's undesirable. Then He went on to say that do not come close to saying your prayers while you are drunk. And then sometime later He mentioned that you simply cannot consume alcohol. It is dirty work of Satan. Rijsum min amali shaitan. Likewise, in some other cases, in the case of fasting as well, we know that there was a permission given by the Almighty to the people who could not keep fasts if they were taken ill or were on a journey. uh, they were offered to complete the number later, but they were given another option that they can give fidya to compensate for the missed fasts by feeding one poor person for each fast left. Now, this facility was withdrawn in the very next verse, where the Almighty mentions that the number has got to be completed in months other than Ramadan. In the case of all those people who are healthy and who are in a position to fast later. So, and likewise, in the case of, for instance, slavery, etc., it was eliminated gradually. But while it was getting eliminated, there were mentions in the Quran which give you an impression that it's a part of the system that the Almighty is allowing, is condoning. So, because of the nature of the Quranic message that it got implemented in the society gradually, you do find verses in the Quran which were revealed at the time when this gradual process was going on, in the earlier part of that gradual process. But obviously, all verses are important. These verses are meant to give us an idea of how the Almighty wisely and intelligently implements His will. And also, these are verses which help us know that even if today we were to invite somebody who is into some evil very deep and is not possible for him to give it up immediately, well, we must give space to the person and allow him to come out of that evil gradually.
Jazakallah. The same brother and sister is asking the meaning of Dabatul Arhad, something like Dabatul Arhad, if I'm pronouncing correctly.
Ehdi Alast.
Dabatul Arhad. Dabatul Ard.
Dabbatul Ard. Okay, right. It is a mention in Surah Al-Qasas towards the end that the Almighty mentions that if these people are not going to believe in what the Almighty is asking them to believe in, then you never know. The Almighty is fully capable of doing many things, one of which is that He might actually ask or require a Dabbatul Ard to come out. That is, some animal beast from the earth might appear who would start telling people that, look here, this message is the right message of God. It's a mention which is telling people that the Almighty can do many different things to cause the truth to be pronounced clearly and effectively. We know that there was no such Dabbatul Ard that actually appeared. It was a possibility that the Almighty mentioned, but the possibility was never realized. It was a reference that was made to the people that this is one of the things that God can do, but in actual fact, He didn't do it. So there are some similar mentions in the Quran wherein the Almighty is talking about the fact that this might actually happen, but it was just a mention of a possibility. But the fact that it didn't mention it didn't happen is also a reality. For instance, the Quran talks about the fact that there could be a possibility that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, would die before the message would prevail, or he would survive to see it prevail. Now, it is talking about two possibilities, one of which actually was realized and the other was not. So, Dabbatul Ard likewise is one of those mentions wherein the Almighty talked about the possibility that there might appear a beast who would declare that, the message is true if God would want such thing to happen. But it did not happen.
Jazakallah. A brother Zubair is asking, what do other scholars think about muhkamat and mutashabihat? And the way you are describing muhkamat and mutashabihat is the other scholars in last 1400 years before, or during 1400 years, anyone has described in the way like you are describing?
I would like to say 2 or 3 things briefly. Number one, while reading the Quran, the important thing is that the description that you are considering as to whether it is right or wrong is the decision has to be left to the text itself. If somebody is saying something which is enabling the text to become clear and is accepted by the text, then that itself is enough for the explanation to be the right one, unless there is something better that comes to replace it. Whether it was mentioned by somebody else in the earlier times or not is not directly relevant. It helps indeed when you know that there are others who also have adopted the same understanding, but it's not a reason for an explanation, interpretation to be considered as acceptable or unacceptable. The second thing is that, you know what, the academic work done by scholars of the entire Islamic world in the last 1400 plus years, all that is not available. Some part of it is available, some other part is not available. What is available also is not what everybody is aware of. So, there are people who say that this point of view has been expressed for the first time, and this point of view is a popular point of view. It's just based on people reading 8, 10, or 12 different interpretations. Having said that, there are others also who have referred to it in the same manner. If you would want to know the names, I'll let you know later. But it's not the first time that this understanding has been presented. It's only that there are other understandings which have become more known. For instance, there are people who, whenever they find a verse which they are not able to interpret properly, they categorize it as mutashabihat. A verse which is confusing, a verse which is unclear. I've already clarified that the entire Quran is clear. However, the mutashabihat verses, despite all of them being clear, their tawil, the reality that they are describing, is what we cannot know. So that's what my understanding and the understanding of the scholars that I think are right, saying the right thing is. But there are others who sometimes say things which are referring to the fact that whenever there are verses that are not possible to be interpreted properly, they categorize them as mutashabihat, which to me is a very, very dangerous thing to do, because then the Quran would become a vague book. God forbid. It's a very clear book. It's a kitabim mubin. Its mentions, all mentions are absolutely clear. However, some clear mentions are referring to realities that we cannot see, and therefore the words are not the exact reflection of what those realities are.
saying Jazakallah khair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saad, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Inshallah, next session of Dr. Khalid Zaheer will be organized on 17th of June, the same time, 9 o'clock, inshallah, will be conducted in English language. And I will send you the email as well, 1 or 2 days before for the session. Many thanks and assalamu alaikum to everyone.